The conference room on the 38th floor of Valtieri Global Solutions was designed to intimidate. 40-foot marble table, floor-to-ceiling windows showing all of Manhattan stretched out like a kingdom below. Leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Everything about the space screamed power, permanence, absolute control. Victoria Ashford sat at the head of that table like a general commanding troops. She hadn't slept in 36 hours. The fluorescent lights above her had become her sun. The coffee machine her best friend. Her assistant had stopped asking if she wanted to go home. Now she just left meals on the edge of her desk, hoping Victoria would remember to eat them between reviews of contracts and financial projections. This deal meant everything, not just business numbers on a spreadsheet, not just a quarterly earnings boost. This $750 million international infrastructure contract represented the culmination of 18 months of negotiation. 3 continents of travel. $20 million of her company's own money invested just to prove they were serious. If this deal closed, the stock price would rise 15%. Billions in market value would be created overnight. Her legacy would be cemented. She would finally, definitively, have proven that a woman from an immigrant family could climb higher than anyone else thought possible. If it failed, she'd be remembered as the CEO who let a deal of this magnitude collapse. The board would question her leadership. Her rivals would circle like sharks smelling blood. The company's competitors would sense weakness. So, she hadn't slept. She'd reviewed every document, every email between delegates, every previous negotiation these men had conducted. She knew their patterns. She knew what they valued. She knew what they feared. She'd prepared for every possible outcome except the one that was actually happening. The Brazilian delegate, Roberto Marques, had arrived at 9 in the morning sharp. Silver hair, bearing of a man who'd negotiated with governments. His suit probably cost $15,000. His watch alone was a statement of success. Behind him came the others. Chinese delegate from Shanghai. German manufacturing representative. Japanese executive who'd held the same position for 23 years. In that culture, that meant he was extremely respected and extremely careful. Frenchman who'd brought his own translator, which was insulting. Saudi Arabian representative who barely spoke English. Portuguese woman in her 40s taking notes on everything. South Korean executive who'd made it clear his company was still on the fence. 8 different cultures. 8 different ways of doing business. 8 different sets of expectations about what respect looked like, what honesty sounded like, what genuine partnership meant. This was what made international negotiations so brutally difficult. It wasn't just about money. It was about understanding thousands of years of cultural context. It was about knowing that in some cultures, direct eye contact meant respect and honesty. In others, it meant aggression, disrespect. A long pause could mean thoughtfulness in one culture and outright rejection in another. The same word could have completely different meanings depending on the tone of voice used to say it. And so far, 12 interpreters had failed to bridge those gaps. The first interpreter, Rebecca Martinez, had lasted 40 minutes. Ivy League education, perfect credentials, all the right papers. She'd gotten the words right but missed the cultural weight entirely. When the Saudi delegate asked about the company's commitment to long-term partnership based on mutual respect and shared values, Rebecca had translated it as a question about financial stability. It made it sound like the Saudi delegate was doubting whether the company could even afford the project. That wasn't what he'd asked at all. The Saudi delegate had noticed immediately. His expression had changed. He'd stood up and requested a replacement. 40 minutes lost, and a relationship potentially damaged beyond repair. The second interpreter was Marcus Chen. 15 years of experience, worked for the State Department, had lived in Beijing for 7 years and Sao Paulo for 5. On paper, he should have been perfect, but he'd missed the cultural weight of a Brazilian silence. When Roberto had listened to the profit-sharing presentation and then gone completely silent for 20 seconds, that silence meant something very specific in Brazilian culture. It meant he was taking the proposal seriously. It meant he was thinking deeply about what was being offered. It meant he was processing the significance of what was being said. James had interpreted it as rejection. He'd told Victoria, the Brazilian delegation has concerns about the profit-sharing structure, which made it sound like Roberto was about to reject the entire proposal. That wasn't what he'd communicated at all. Roberto had stood up immediately. He needed to consult with his team. He'd been gone for 30 minutes. When he came back, everything had shifted. He was more guarded, less willing to engage, less willing to trust. By the time the 10th interpreter sat down, Victoria could feel the room falling apart, not all at once, but inevitably. Delegate by delegate, the international representatives were becoming more hostile, more closed off, more convinced they were dealing with a company that didn't understand them, and didn't care to try. The Chinese delegate had gone completely silent, not angry. Silence was worse than anger. Silence meant he'd made a decision and was no longer open to negotiation. The Saudi representative had stood up twice to leave. The Portuguese woman had stopped taking notes. She was just staring at the table. The German woman was checking her watch. The Frenchman had made a comment, very quietly, about the quality of the interpretations. By the time David Chen, the 12th interpreter, sat down, Victoria knew she had maybe 3 minutes. 3 minutes before these delegates walked out of the room permanently, before the deal died, before everything she'd built came crashing down, David was 28 years old, perfect credentials on paper, had learned Mandarin in a classroom, passed all his certifications with flying colors, had all the right papers and the right qualifications, but he'd never actually lived in China. He'd never navigated real conversations with real people who didn't speak slowly just because he was learning. He was nervous. His hands trembled as he adjusted his earpiece. He kept clearing his throat. He looked down at his notes instead of making eye contact with the delegates. When the Chinese delegate spoke, David was translating from a recording the company had made. The delegate said in perfect Mandarin, "We are honored by your partnership vision. We see tremendous potential for mutual growth and shared success. However, we need deeper understanding of your company's long-term commitment to investing in our shared vision." It was a nuanced statement, positive overall with a request for clarification. It was the kind of statement that shows respect and interest, while also indicating that specific concerns need to be addressed. David translated it as, "We have significant concerns about your company's commitment to this project. We are not confident in your long-term vision." The room went absolutely silent. Victoria watched the Chinese delegate's expression change. From engaged to cold, he looked directly at her. His eyes said everything. "You have just told me you don't trust me. You have just told me we are not partners. You have just told me this negotiation is over." The Chinese delegate stood up. Victoria's heart stopped. She could feel it actually stop in her chest. 36 hours without sleep, 18 months of negotiation, $20 million of company investment, her entire legacy, all about to walk out the door. That's when the knock came. It was a quiet knock, not aggressive, not demanding, just a simple knock that said, "I'm here, I need to come in." Everyone in the room looked up. The door was slightly open. Through it, Victoria could see a man in a worn navy uniform, a janitor. He was holding a mop. "Sir," Victoria said coldly, "I need you to leave, now." But the man stepped into the doorway anyway. His name was Marcus Reed, and he was about to change everything. Part 2. The Invisible Man Before the Moment. 3 hours earlier, Marcus had no idea any of this was happening. He was thinking about Rosa. Rosa was a mother of 3 who'd come to his Saturday morning language session for the past 8 weeks. She was from Hanoi, Vietnam. She'd been in America for 3 years. Her English was broken but improving every single week. She was learning because her youngest child, a daughter named Lynn, was struggling in school. The teacher had requested a parent-teacher conference. Rosa wanted to be able to advocate for her daughter. She wanted to understand what the teacher was saying, instead of just nodding and smiling, instead of hoping for the best. Last Saturday, during the session, Rosa had a breakthrough moment. She'd been learning phrases about parent-teacher conferences. Marcus had taught her vocabulary about academic performance, about learning styles, about the different ways children process information. He'd taught her how to ask questions, how to advocate, how to make her voice heard in a system that often didn't listen to parents who didn't speak English fluently. And then at the end of the session, Rosa had said something that made Marcus understand why he did this work. "I want to help my daughter learn English too. I want to show her that I am trying. I want to show her that it is never too late to learn, even for a mother. Even when you are tired and busy and you have to work 2 jobs. When she said that, Marcus had felt something in his chest, a kind of quiet joy, the kind you don't get from promotions or money or any of the things people usually chase. Just the simple fact that he'd helped someone understand something important, that he'd helped someone become less invisible, in a system that often rendered people like her completely invisible. As Marcus mopped the lobby floor of the Valtieri building at 5:30 in the morning, he was thinking about what he could teach Rosa next. Maybe some phrases about parent-teacher conferences, maybe some language about how to write an email to a teacher, maybe some vocabulary about advocating for your child in a school system that doesn't always understand where you come from. The building was quiet at this hour. Most of the people who worked here were still asleep. The ones who were in the building were early arrivals like Victoria Ashford, people who couldn't rest, who needed to work. Marcus's daughter was still asleep at home. Her name was Sophie. She was 11 years old. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness. She was in 5th grade. She was doing well academically. She wanted to be a doctor someday, or maybe a teacher, or maybe a translator, because she'd heard her father talk about languages, and it fascinated her in that way some children got fascinated by stories. Marcus was proud of her in a way that made his heart hurt sometimes. He thought about Sophie sometimes as he mopped, thought about how she'd be waking up soon, thought about how he'd need to braid her hair before school, using the same tutorial he'd learned online all those years ago. It still took him longer than it should, but Sophie had stopped complaining about it years ago. She'd learned patience from watching her father. How he'd pack her lunch in the same purple thermos that Margaret had chosen, the one that still somehow felt like it contained a piece of his wife, even after all these years. A man in an expensive Italian suit came through the revolving doors while Marcus was mopping. The man was on his phone, not paying attention, the kind of carelessness that only people used to having other people accommodate them could manage. He wore dress shoes with Italian leather heels. His suit cost more than Marcus made in a month. His phone looked like it cost a week's salary. The man wasn't looking down, wasn't paying attention to where he was walking, was moving with the kind of certainty that comes from never having experienced real consequences for not paying attention. Marcus had already mopped this section. The floor was gleaming. He'd put up a wet floor sign, clearly visible. Any person paying attention would have seen it. The man was not paying attention. He walked directly toward the puddle. Marcus had about 2 seconds to decide what to do. He could let it happen. The man would slip. He'd fall. He'd learn a lesson about paying attention. It would have been satisfying in a small way. There was something just about consequences, catching up with people who moved through the world without looking. But Marcus thought about Sophie, thought about how she'd inherited her father's instinct, the instinct to help people, even when it cost something. Thought about what she'd say if she knew he'd let someone fall when he could have prevented it. So he stepped in. He moved quickly, directly into the man's path. Hands up. "Sir, the floor is..." But the man's momentum was already too much. He crashed directly into Marcus. His expensive phone flew across the marble floor, sliding 20 feet before it hit a planter and shattered. His leather briefcase came open, papers scattered everywhere like leaves in wind. Important-looking papers, papers with signatures on them, papers that looked like they mattered. The man fell hard on his right side. His right knee took the impact. He went down with a cry of pain. For a moment there was only silence. Just the sound of papers settling on the marble floor. Then the man started cursing. In English and Mandarin. Loud enough that even at 5:30 in the morning, when the building was mostly empty, his voice echoed through the cavernous space. But Marcus didn't apologize for existing. That was the thing about him. He was quiet, but he wasn't small. He wasn't the kind of person who shrinks away and makes himself smaller when things went wrong. He didn't take responsibility for other people's carelessness. He kneeled down immediately and helped the man to his feet with steady hands. "Your knee," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. He was assessing the damage, checking whether the man could stand, whether anything was broken, whether this was something that would heal or something that would need serious medical attention. The man looked at Marcus like he was trying to place where he'd seen him before and couldn't. There was confusion in his eyes, and pain, and the growing panic of someone who was about to be late for something important. "Can you put weight on it?" Marcus asked. The man tested it carefully. He flinched, but he nodded. "Okay, that's good. Not broken probably, but ice it, now. You need to go to first aid. Tell them to ice it for 15 minutes before you do anything else." "I have a meeting in 4 minutes, the man said, looking at his watch with genuine panic. His papers were scattered across the marble floor. His suit jacket was wet from the puddle. His briefcase was broken. The hinge was bent at an angle that suggested it wouldn't close properly again. The man's hands were shaking, just slightly. But Marcus noticed it. This was someone who was supposed to be somewhere important, someone who had expectations placed on him, someone who was about to be late for something that mattered. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the scattered papers. Then he made a choice that would echo through the next several months of his life, a choice that would completely change the trajectory of Victoria Ashford's future. He didn't clock out, didn't radio anyone, didn't fill out an incident report, didn't follow any of the protocols. He just started moving. Fast but not frantic, the pace of someone who knows how to work under pressure, the pace of someone who has learned through years of practice how to assess a situation and respond efficiently. He gathered the papers, sorted them by signature and company logo. There were contract amendments, financial projections, correspondence with government officials, all of it scattered across the floor, all of it important. His movements were economical, efficient, the work of someone who had been doing difficult things under pressure for a very long time. He organized everything back into the broken briefcase, held it closed with one hand while he helped the man to his feet with the other. "Go," he said. "West elevator. It's faster. When you get there, tell them your name. Tell them you were the guy they brought in from Shanghai last month. How did you... Your briefcase tag. Valtieri Global, 38th floor. I see the roster." The man stared at him for a moment. This janitor. This man in a worn uniform. This man who had just helped him despite having no obligation to do so. Despite having nothing to gain from it. The man's hands were still shaking, but his eyes had changed. There was recognition in them. There was gratitude. Then he took his briefcase and ran for the elevator. Marcus watched him go. Then he went back to mopping. He had no idea that man had just been pulled into an emergency boardroom meeting. That he was the Chinese delegate who represented $1 billion investment from Shanghai. That in exactly 3 hours, the fate of a $750 million contract would depend on someone remembering that a janitor had helped him. He had no idea that his choice to help a stranger, made in 4 minutes in an empty lobby, would set off a chain of events that would change his life. And the life of Victoria Ashford forever. He just mopped the floor. He mopped it carefully, paying attention to the corners, making sure there were no spots he'd missed, making sure that the next person who walked across this marble would be safe. wouldn't slip, wouldn't fall. That was what he did. He cleaned, he helped, he showed up, and he never expected anything in return. Part 3. The moment Victoria Ashford lost her blindness. 1 month before the boardroom crisis, Victoria Ashford was working late in her office. It was 8 o'clock on a Thursday night. Most of the building was empty, but Victoria was still at her desk. She had no plans to leave before 10, usually not before midnight. She was reviewing a marketing presentation, a presentation that was supposed to highlight the company's strengths, make investors excited about the $750 million deal, a presentation that was supposed to convince 8 of the most powerful business figures from 8 different countries that Valtteri Global Solutions was the partner they wanted for the next decade of their lives. It was terrible. It was generic, boring. It was something that any company could have produced. There was nothing in it that suggested why Valtteri was special, why this company deserved the investment, why these international delegates should trust them with hundreds of millions of dollars. Victoria deleted the entire thing. She opened a blank document and began rewriting it herself. This was how Victoria worked. She didn't delegate the important things. She didn't trust anyone else to get it exactly right. She'd learned early on that if you wanted something done well, you had to do it yourself. Her parents had taught her that. They'd come to America from Shanghai with nothing. No money, no connections, no English, just determination, and a willingness to work until their hands bled, until their backs broke, until their minds were too tired to think anymore. Her father had been an engineer in Shanghai. A good one. He'd had a job, he'd had colleagues who respected him, he'd had credentials that meant something in China. But those credentials meant nothing in America, so he'd started over. He'd taken a job as a maintenance worker at a factory. He'd worked 10-hour days for minimum wage. He'd gone to community college at night. He'd studied for years. He'd gotten a new degree. He'd gotten his professional credentials recognized by the American system. It had taken him 8 years of working 2 jobs, 8 years of living in a tiny apartment, 8 years of speaking English with an accent that made people underestimate him, 8 years of fighting for respect in a country that didn't recognize who he'd been before he arrived. By the time Victoria was 10, her father had a job as a structural engineer. It wasn't prestigious, it wasn't high-paying, but it was legitimate. And her mother had done the same thing. She'd been a physician in Shanghai. She'd had a practice. She'd had patients who trusted her. She'd had a reputation. But none of that transferred to America. So she'd become a nurse. She'd worked night shifts in a hospital. She'd taken care of people who often didn't listen to her, because she didn't look like they expected an authority figure to look. She'd studied for 8 years. By the time Victoria was in high school, her mother had finally gotten her medical license recognized. She'd become a physician again, but it had taken her longer than it should have. It had cost her more than it should have. And through it all, they'd made sure Victoria understood the lesson. Hard work pays off. Intelligence wins. You climb by being smarter than everyone else. You climb by never showing weakness. You climb by being twice as good, twice as smart, twice as relentless as anyone around you. Victoria had internalized that lesson perfectly. She'd been the top student in her high school, full ride to Stanford, MBA from Wharton, worked at a top consulting firm, joined Valtteri as a junior analyst, risen through the ranks faster than anyone else, become VP of operations at 39, become CEO at 48. Now she was running one of the most important companies in the country, and she was still working 80-hour weeks, still living like the money didn't matter, still pushing herself harder than anyone else around her. There was no partner. There had been someone once, in her 30s, a man named David. He was smart, he was kind, he wanted her to slow down. He'd asked her to spend more time together, to prioritize the relationship over her career, to be present instead of always being at work. She'd ended it. She'd chosen her career. There were no close friends, no hobbies, no life outside of work, just the work. As Victoria was rewriting the marketing presentation, she heard a commotion outside her office. Her assistant, a young woman named Jennifer, poked her head in the door. "Sir, there's a young man here who needs to speak with you about something work-related. He says it's important." Victoria looked up from her computer. She hadn't asked for anyone to come see her. Her calendar showed she was supposed to be reviewing quarterly reports and approving the final contracts for the Chinese deal. She didn't have time for unscheduled meetings. "Who is it?" Victoria asked. "His name is Marcus. He's one of the night janitors. He helped one of the junior analysts, James Chen, understand a work email about the French proposal." Victoria felt something shift inside her. Irritation? Concern? She wasn't sure, but she felt it clearly. The night janitor was involved in work that was above his pay grade. This was exactly the kind of boundary crossing that needed to be managed. Jennifer should have sent him away. "Tell him to come in," Victoria said. She didn't know why she said it. She should have told Jennifer to handle it, should have had security escort the man out, should have sent a message that employees in his position didn't have access to her office. But something made her want to see him, to understand what he wanted. Marcus came in carefully, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to be there. He was wearing his janitor uniform. It was clean, but it was worn. His shoes were worn. His uniform was faded. Everything about him said, "I have a lower status job. I am not supposed to be in the corner office of the CEO." He sat down across from Victoria without being invited to sit. That surprised her. Usually people in his position were more deferential, more apologetic about taking up her time, more aware of the social hierarchy. This man just sat down like he was an equal. "I wanted to talk to you about James," Marcus said, "about the work he's doing." Victoria leaned back in her chair. This was unusual. This was unexpected. "What about it?" she said. "I helped him understand some French language context on a proposal, but I wanted to make sure that was okay. I didn't want to overstep or anything. I know I'm just a janitor. I know I'm not supposed to be doing that kind of work. I just saw that he was struggling, and I thought I could help." Victoria looked at this man, really looked at him for the first time. He was calm, he was respectful. But he wasn't apologetic, he wasn't making himself small, he wasn't assuming that she was angry at him for stepping outside his role. He was just telling her what he'd done and why he'd done it. "How did you help him?" Victoria asked. He was confused about a phrase in French that could be interpreted two ways, one diplomatic, one insulting. I explained the cultural context. I helped him understand which interpretation was more likely based on the tone of the email and who it was from. "Do you speak French?" Victoria asked. "Yes," Marcus said simply. "And Portuguese, German, Japanese, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, a little bit of Korean." Victoria felt something happen inside her chest. A recognition, a shift in perspective, a moment where she realized she might have been very wrong about something. 8 languages. This man who mopped her building spoke 8 languages. "Why didn't you mention this before?" she asked. "Because you told me to stay in my lane," Marcus said. His voice was gentle, but the words were direct. "You said I was here to mop floors and that's what I should do." Victoria remembered. It had been 1 month earlier. She'd been walking quickly through the building. She was thinking about the Chinese deal. She was thinking about negotiations. She was thinking about 1,000 important things. James had been getting help from the janitor. She'd said something dismissive, something about staying in lanes, something that suggested she'd already decided what this man was capable of. She'd done it without breaking stride, without even really looking at the man she was speaking to. And she'd never thought about it again. Until this moment. "I was wrong," Victoria said. Marcus nodded like he'd expected her to say that. Like he'd come to her office hoping to hear it, but not necessarily expecting it. "Thank you for helping, James," Victoria said. "Thank you for caring about your work beyond mopping floors." Marcus left a few minutes later. But something had changed in Victoria. Something had cracked open in her carefully constructed worldview. That night, she couldn't sleep. She was thinking about all the other times she might have looked past someone, all the other times she might have dismissed someone without really seeing them, all the other times she might have made a snap judgment about what someone was capable of, based on their job title, or their education level, or the way they looked. She thought about her parents, about how they'd had degrees and credentials and intelligence, but those things hadn't automatically translated into the jobs they were qualified for, about how they'd had to prove themselves over and over again, about how they'd had to work twice as hard for half as much recognition. She thought about Marcus, with 8 languages, mopping floors at night so he could be present for his daughter during the day. She thought about all the invisible talent in her company, all the intelligence that was being wasted, because no one had thought to look. By morning, she'd made a decision. She would create something, a program, an initiative, something that would identify overlooked talent and invest in it. Something that would ensure that no one else got looked past, the way Marcus had been looked past, the way her parents had been looked past. But first, she had to save a $750 million deal. Part 4. The Moment of Collapse. The morning of the boardroom crisis, Victoria hadn't slept in 36 hours. She'd been in her office since 4 in the morning Tuesday, and it was now Wednesday afternoon. The fluorescent lights above her desk had become her sun. The coffee machine in the executive break room had become her best friend. Her assistant had stopped asking if she wanted to go home. She just brought her meals now, leaving them on the edge of her desk, hoping Victoria would remember to eat them. This deal meant everything. It wasn't just business numbers on a spreadsheet. It was vindication. It was proof that a woman from an immigrant family could climb higher than anyone else thought possible. It was the culmination of everything she'd worked for, since she was a child watching her parents work 80-hour weeks, to build something from nothing. The $750 million international infrastructure deal had taken 18 months to negotiate. 18 months of flights to Shanghai and Berlin and Sao Paulo. 18 months of learning the subtle differences between how different cultures approach business. 18 months of her company investing $20 million in development costs, just to prove they were serious about the project. If the deal closed, the stock price would rise 15%. That meant billions in market value would be created. That meant her legacy would be cemented. That meant she would finally, definitively, have proven that she belonged in the highest rooms of power. If it failed, she'd be remembered as the CEO who let a $750 million deal collapse. The board would question her leadership. Her rivals would circle. The company's competitors would smell blood in the water. So she hadn't slept. She'd reviewed every document, every contract amendment, every email between the delegates. every previous negotiation these men had conducted, so she could understand their patterns, how they thought, what they valued, what they feared. The conference room on the 38th floor had been prepared with military precision. 12 chairs arranged around a table that was 40 feet long. The marble was polished so thoroughly you could see your reflection in it. The chairs were leather, imported from Italy, each one costing more than most people's monthly salary. The view from the windows showed all of Manhattan stretched out below them like a kingdom. It was a subtle power move. The view said, "This company is powerful. This company is here. This company will outlast any competitor. This company is where decisions that matter actually get made." The Brazilian delegate arrived first at 9 in the morning sharp. His name was Roberto Marques. He was in his 60s, silver hair, bearing of a man who had negotiated with governments and presidents. He carried himself with the weight of someone whose word meant something. Behind him came the others: China, Germany, Japan, France, Saudi Arabia, Portugal, South Korea. Each one represented a different culture, a different way of doing business, a different set of expectations and etiquette. This was what made international negotiation so brutally difficult. It wasn't just about money, it was about understanding thousands of years of cultural context. It was about knowing that in some cultures, direct eye contact meant respect. In others, it meant aggression. That a long pause could mean thoughtfulness in one language and impatience in another. That the same word could have completely different meanings, depending on the tone of voice used. The first interpreter arrived at 8:45 in the morning. Her name was Rebecca Martinez, Ivy League educated, perfect accent, all the credentials you could want. References from the State Department, a resume that was flawless. She lasted 40 minutes. The Saudi delegate had asked a question about the company's commitment to long-term partnership. It was a reasonable question. It was the kind of question that mattered in Saudi business culture, where relationships and trust were more important than contracts and legal language. Rebecca had translated it as, "Does your company have the financial stability to support this project long-term?" Which wasn't wrong exactly, but it missed the cultural context entirely. It made it sound like the Saudi delegate was questioning whether the company could afford the project. That wasn't what he'd asked at all. The Saudi delegate had noticed the mistranslation immediately. His expression had changed. He'd stood up and said something sharp in Arabic to his assistant. Then he'd asked to have Rebecca replaced. The second interpreter was a man named Marcus Chen, 15 years of experience, worked for the State Department, had lived in Beijing for 7 years, had lived in Sao Paulo for 5 years. This man should have been perfect, but he'd missed the cultural weight of a Brazilian silence. The Brazilian delegate, Roberto, had listened to a presentation about the company's profit-sharing model. Then he'd gone silent, completely silent, for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 seconds. In Brazilian culture, that silence was meaningful. It meant the Brazilian delegate was taking the proposal seriously. It meant he was thinking deeply about what was being offered. It meant he was processing the significance of what was being said. James had interpreted the silence as rejection. He'd said, "The Brazilian delegation has concerns about the profit-sharing structure," which had made it sound like the Brazilian delegate was rejecting the proposal entirely. That wasn't what he'd communicated at all. Roberto had stood up immediately. He needed to consult with his team. He'd been gone for 30 minutes. When he came back, everything had shifted. He was more guarded, less willing to engage, less willing to trust what was being said. By the time the 10th interpreter sat down, Victoria could feel the room falling apart. Not all at once, but inevitably. Delegate by delegate, the international representatives were becoming more hostile, more closed off, more convinced they were dealing with a company that didn't understand them and didn't care to try. The Chinese delegate had gone completely silent, not angry. Silence was worse than anger. Silence meant he'd made a decision and was no longer open to negotiation. The Saudi representative had stood up twice to leave. The Portuguese woman had stopped taking notes. She was just staring at the table. The German woman was checking her watch. The Frenchman had made a comment very quietly about the quality of the interpretations. By the time David Chen, the 12th interpreter, sat down, Victoria knew she had maybe 3 minutes. 3 minutes before these delegates walked out of the room permanently. Before the deal died. Before everything she'd built came crashing down. David was 28 years old. Perfect credentials on paper. Had learned Mandarin in a classroom. Passed all his certifications with flying colors. Had all the right papers and the right qualifications. But he'd never actually lived in China. He'd never navigated real conversations with real people who didn't speak slowly just because he was learning. He was nervous. His hands trembled as he adjusted his earpiece. He kept clearing his throat. He looked down at his notes instead of making eye contact with the delegates. When the Chinese delegate spoke, David was translating from a recording the company had made. The delegate said in perfect Mandarin, "We are honored by your partnership vision. We see tremendous potential for mutual growth and shared success. However, we need deeper understanding of your company's long-term commitment to investing in our shared vision." It was a nuanced statement, positive overall. With a request for clarification, It was the kind of statement that shows respect and interest, while also indicating that specific concerns need to be addressed. David translated it as, "We have significant concerns about your company's commitment to this project. We are not confident in your long-term vision." The room went absolutely silent. Victoria watched the Chinese delegate's expression change, from engaged to cold. He looked directly at her. His eyes said everything. "You have just told me you don't trust me. You have just told me we are not partners. You have just told me this negotiation is over." The Chinese delegate stood up. Victoria's heart stopped. She could feel it actually stop in her chest. 36 hours without sleep, 18 months of negotiation, $20 million of company investment, her entire legacy, all about to walk out the door. That's when the knock came. It was a quiet knock, not aggressive, not demanding, just a simple knock that said, "I'm here. I need to come in." Everyone in the room looked up. The door was slightly open. Through it, Victoria could see a man in a worn navy uniform, a janitor. He was holding a mop. "Sir," Victoria said coldly, "I need you to leave. Now!" But the man stepped into the doorway anyway. His name was Marcus Reed, and he was about to change everything. Part 5. The knock and the transformation. He didn't move aggressively. He didn't push his way in. He simply stood in the doorway with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you might fail, but deciding it doesn't matter, because the alternative is worse. Victoria stared at him, waiting for an explanation, waiting for him to stumble over his words. She was the CEO. She didn't have to listen to a janitor. She could have him removed by security in less than a minute. But something about his presence made her pause. The Chinese delegate just heard his partnership described as rejection, Marcus said. His voice was steady and clear. "Because the last interpreter translated mutual investment framework as we don't trust your terms. That's a catastrophic mistranslation." The room had gone absolutely still. Victoria felt her anger shift into something else. Confusion, curiosity, a growing sense that this man knew something important. In Mandarin, Marcus continued, "That phrase is built on centuries of relationship-building tradition. It's not just about the business transaction. It's about offering a commitment to build something together that will last for years. It's not a statement of doubt. It's a statement of potential." He looked at the Chinese delegate directly. "The Brazilian delegate heard aggressive when Portuguese meant diplomatic," Marcus continued. "And the Saudi representative heard himself being patronized when the speaker was being careful to be respectful. These aren't small mistakes. These are the kinds of mistranslations that destroy trust before it even has a chance to form." The Chinese delegate was looking at Marcus now, with an expression that had shifted from cold anger to something that looked like recognition. "You speak Mandarin," the delegate said. "It wasn't a question." "Well enough, if you let me try." Victoria wanted to stop this. Every professional instinct was telling her to remove this man from the room, to restore order, to get back to business, but she couldn't move. She couldn't speak. Something was happening that she didn't fully understand, but she recognized that it mattered. The Chinese delegate gestured to the empty interpreter chair without looking at Victoria. "Let him try," the delegate said. Marcus took the seat. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't apologize for his worn uniform, or his lack of credentials, or the fact that he was a janitor in a room full of people in expensive suits. He simply sat down and asked for the original recordings to be played again. What happened in the next 8 minutes would become the reason Victoria Ashford would spend the next several months, re-evaluating everything she thought she knew about talent, value, and who deserved to be seen. Marcus listened to the original Mandarin recordings with the kind of focus that suggested he was hearing something no one else in the room could access. His eyes were closed. His hands were still. He was completely present. When he began to translate, it was like watching someone unlock a door that had been locked for hours. He didn't just translate the words, he translated the meaning behind the words. He explained the cultural weight that lived between the syllables. He showed them what had been lost in translation. He showed them what they'd almost destroyed, without even realizing it. When the Chinese delegate had used that phrase about investment, Marcus explained what it really meant. In Mandarin, he said, "When someone uses this phrase, they're offering you not just a business transaction, but a commitment to building something together that will last for years. It's a very serious offer. It's an offer of trust. It carries the weight of centuries of partnership tradition. To reject that without understanding its significance is to reject not just a business proposal, but a gesture of profound respect." The Chinese delegate nodded. His expression had changed completely. He was starting to understand that he had been heard, that someone finally understood what he was trying to say. When Marcus explained what the Brazilian delegate's silence had meant, Roberto leaned back in his chair. A physical shift from hostility to openness, a sign that the emotional temperature in the room had changed. Marcus described the moment of silence as a moment of appreciation. In Brazilian business culture, he explained, silence after a proposal is not rejection. It's the sound of a man thinking carefully about something important. It's the sound of respect. It's the sound of someone taking you seriously enough to truly consider what you've said. When Marcus described the Saudi representative's formal register explaining that it showed honor and respect, not distance, The older man actually smiled. A small smile, but real. A smile that said, finally. Finally, someone understands. By the time Marcus had translated and explained all three critical moments that the previous interpreters had bungled, the energy in the entire room had transformed. The delegates were no longer hostile. They were engaged. They were interested. They were ready to continue the conversation. By minute 8, when Victoria quietly asked to resume the negotiation, nobody objected. What happened over the next hour was something she would replay in her mind for years afterward. The delegates came to agreement on the terms. Not easily, but genuinely. They signed the contract. The $750 million deal was saved. When it was all over, when everyone was shaking hands and gathering their papers, the Chinese delegate approached Marcus and spoke to him in Mandarin. His words meant, thank you for hearing us, not thank you for translating, not thank you for fixing the deal, but thank you for hearing us, for seeing us, for understanding. As Marcus turned to leave the boardroom, his eyes met Victoria's for just a moment. In that moment, she saw him, really saw him, for the first time. And everything changed. Part 6. The Private Confession. 30 minutes after the boardroom negotiation concluded, Victoria found Marcus loading his mop cart back into the supply closet on the 38th floor. The sun was higher now. The morning had turned into midday. The building was filling up with people. Meetings were starting. The ordinary rhythm of the workday was resuming, as if nothing momentous had just happened. But something had. Marcus was alone in the hallway when Victoria found him. He was loading supplies. He was cleaning out his cart. He was moving like someone who was used to doing his job, regardless of what had happened earlier. Like he hadn't just saved a $750 million deal. Like he hadn't just changed his own life, and the life of the woman who owned the company. Victoria had changed out of her blazer. She'd brushed her hair. She'd composed herself as much as she could. She appeared in the doorway of the supply closet. Marcus looked up. I need to speak with you, she said. Not as a CEO. Not as someone who could fire him or promote him or change his life. Just as someone who needed to talk to him. He followed her to the small conference room. The one on the 38th floor with the blinds half open, where morning light came through at angles. That somehow made ordinary rooms feel quietly important. There were already 2 cups of coffee on the table when they arrived. She had ordered them before she found him. Had known somehow that this conversation was coming, and had prepared for it. They sat down across from each other. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Victoria was not a woman who found it easy to admit she was wrong. It went against everything she'd built, everything she'd learned from her parents, everything she'd trained herself to believe about how the world worked. But something had shifted in her during that boardroom moment. Something fundamental had cracked open. Your name is Marcus, she said finally. Yes, he said. I didn't know that. I should have asked. She paused, gathered her thoughts, found the words that needed to be said. 1 month ago, I told you to stay in your lane. I didn't even use your name. I didn't even look at you fully. And I told you that your job was to mop floors, as if that was the only thing you were capable of, as if that was all you were. Marcus waited. He didn't defend himself. He didn't make excuses for her. He just listened. I was wrong, Victoria said, and I'm sorry. It wasn't a performance. Her voice was steady. But there was something underneath it, something that suggested this was costing her something to say. These were words that had weight. In the boardroom, I watched you do something 12 experts couldn't do, Victoria continued. I watched you solve a problem that was costing this company hundreds of millions of dollars, and I realized that I had made a decision about what you were capable of, and I had simply stopped looking after that. I had decided you were one thing, and so I was blind to everything else you were. She paused. I almost destroyed the most valuable resource in this company. Not because of bad strategy or bad timing, but because I looked past you so completely that I almost missed you, even when you were standing right in front of me. She was quiet for a moment, looking down at her hands. I want to ask you something, Victoria said, and I want you to answer honestly. Okay, Marcus said, why didn't you just let me fire you and forget about it? Why did you knock on that door? You had nothing to gain. You had everything to lose. Your job, your reputation, your safety. So why did you do it? Marcus looked at Victoria for a long moment before answering. Because there was a man in that room who wasn't being heard, he said finally. And I understood that. I understood what it felt like to be in a room where people don't understand you, where they look at you but they don't see you, where they've already decided what you are, and they're not interested in looking deeper. He paused. I've been invisible my whole life. I've been looked past. I've been dismissed. But I also know what it feels like to be seen, to have someone care enough to listen, to have someone treat you like what you're trying to say matters, like you matter. He looked directly at Victoria. That man in the room deserved to be heard, and so I tried to make sure he was. Because even though I have nothing else, I have that. I have the ability to listen, to translate, to help people understand each other. And sometimes, when you have something that can help someone, you use it. Not for gain, not for recognition, but because it's the right thing to do. Victoria felt something break open inside her. She pushed the coffee toward him. I want to start something, she said. A foundation, a program, something that identifies people like you, people whose abilities have been overlooked. Because no one thought to look. People who have learned things outside the traditional system. People who have knowledge and talent that nobody asked about. Because nobody thought to ask. She paused. I want to build it with you, as a partner. Not an employee, a partner. Marcus was quiet for a long time. I need to know something first, he said. Why are you really doing this? Is this just guilt? Is this just about making yourself feel better? For the way you treated me? Victoria answered honestly. Partly yes. I feel guilty. I should feel guilty. I was wrong. But it's more than that. This is about my parents, about how they came here with degrees and credentials and intelligence, and none of it mattered. Because they were immigrants, because they looked different, because people had already decided what they were capable of. She looked directly at Marcus. It's about all the people like them, like you, like everyone in this building who is carrying more talent than anyone realizes, but nobody's looking for it, because they've already decided what that person's job is. I want to change that. I want to make sure that no one else gets looked past. The way you got looked past, the way my parents got looked past. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, he said, I'll do it. I'll partner with you. But there are conditions. What conditions? Victoria asked. The first is that we keep the Saturday morning language sessions. I've been running them for 3 years. For free. In the community. And I'm not stopping. That's not negotiable. Victoria nodded without hesitation. The second is that my daughter comes first. Always. If there's a conflict between my work with the foundation and my responsibilities to her, my daughter wins. I didn't turn down my scholarship and spend years working at night just so I could abandon her for a career. Victoria nodded again. The third is that we do this right. We don't do performative charity. We don't do something that just makes us look good. We find real talent. We invest in real people. We actually change lives. Not for a photo opportunity, just because it's the right thing to do. Victoria felt something settle inside her. This man, this quiet man who mopped floors at night and spoke 8 languages and had raised his daughter alone after losing his wife. This man who had the integrity to set conditions instead of just accepting what was offered. This was the kind of person worth building something with. Agreed, she said, all 3 conditions, no negotiation. They shook hands across the table, and in that moment, in that small conference room with the morning light coming through, at just the right angle, 2 people from completely different worlds chose to see each other as human. Part 7. The Ripple Effect. For the next 3 weeks, Victoria couldn't think about anything else. She was supposed to be running the company. She was supposed to be closing the Chinese deal, finalizing contracts, managing all the 1,000 other things that came with being CEO. But all she could think about was how to structure this foundation, how to make it real, how to make it sustainable. She drafted announcements, she revised them, she deleted them, she started over. She kept thinking about what she wanted to say, how she wanted to frame this. And finally, 3 days before the all-hands meeting, she realized something. She couldn't frame it. She couldn't make it sound like strategy. It was confession. It was an admission that she had been wrong, that she had looked past people, that she had built her career on assumptions, instead of seeing what was really in front of her. So that's what she wrote. She wrote about the moment she told Marcus to stay in his lane, about how she'd been walking fast and hadn't looked at him, about how she almost cost the company $750 million because she wasn't paying attention. She wrote about her parents, about how they'd had to fight for recognition, about how she'd internalized the lesson that value came from credentials instead of from character. She wrote about Marcus speaking 8 languages that nobody knew about him mopping floors at night so he could be present for his daughter during the day, about him running Saturday morning language sessions for free, because he cared about people. She wrote about what it meant to see someone, really see them, not what they looked like, not their job title, but who they actually were. And she wrote about the foundation, not as a business initiative, but as a commitment to never let anyone else get looked past. The auditorium was full on the day of the announcement. 300 employees, 300 people who worked for Victoria Ashford, 300 people who saw her as powerful and brilliant and almost unreachable. Victoria stood at the front of the auditorium. She looked different than she normally did. Not smaller, but more present, more real, like something in her had shifted and couldn't shift back. Before she said anything about the Unseen Talent Initiative, she told them about Marcus. 1 week ago, she said, I dismissed someone, not for a good reason, not because he lacked ability, but because I didn't take the time to look past what I expected to see. The room was quiet. This wasn't how the CEO normally spoke. I told him to stay in his lane. I did it without breaking stride. I did it without looking at him fully, and I did it so completely that I almost missed the most valuable thing he had to offer. She paused. That man walked into a room 1 week ago where he wasn't invited, a room where 12 experts had already failed, a room that was about to cost this company $750 million. And he did something those 12 experts couldn't do. He made people understand each other. She let that sit in the room. He speaks 8 languages. All of them learned outside of universities. All of them learned through conversation and showing up for other people. And I realized, standing in that boardroom watching him work, that I had been looking past him so completely that I almost never knew this about him. She looked directly at the camera that was recording this. I realized that day that if I almost missed someone that visible in a crisis, how many people am I missing every day? How many of our best solutions are standing in our hallways, invisible, because no one thought to look? She stepped to the side of the slide. This initiative exists because I was wrong, and because I don't want that to happen again. Not here, not ever. The Unseen Talent Initiative is for people like Marcus Reed, people whose abilities are real, but undocumented. Knowledge built through genuine care for others, not through credentials, experience earned outside the classroom, the kind of talent that never gets asked about. Because no one thinks to ask the question. She paused. We had a $750 million answer to a $750 million problem. Standing in our hallway, we almost sent it away. That is a failure of our imagination. And this initiative is how we correct it, not just once, but as a practice. The applause started slowly. Then it became the real kind. Not polite applause, the kind that comes from a room that understands it just heard the truth. Marcus was not in that room. He was 1 floor below, walking 3 junior analysts through the proper structure of a formal business letter. The kind where tone matters as much as content, where getting it right can change what someone believes is possible. He found out about the announcement the next morning, when a colleague forwarded him a video clip. He watched it at his kitchen table. His coffee went cold. His daughter, Sophie, sat beside him eating cereal. She didn't ask why he was quiet, because she had always understood quiet, better than most people twice her age. She reached over and put her small hand on top of his. They sat together in the morning light, in their ordinary kitchen, in a moment that felt sacred. Over the next months, everything changed. The foundation was established. Victoria invested her own money into it, real money, millions of dollars, not for a tax write-off, not for publicity, just because she decided it was the right thing to do. Marcus left his job as a night janitor. He became the director of community education for the Unseen Foundation. The Saturday morning language sessions expanded. They moved from the folding table outside the community center to an actual building, a room that was climate controlled, with reliable electricity and space for more people. A retired postal worker named Gerald became a regular, learning enough Spanish to talk to his new next-door neighbors. He brought pound cake to every session from his 3rd week onward, because he said learning goes better with something sweet. Sophie started coming to help. She was 7 years old. She set out the chairs and refilled water cups and corrected people's pronunciation with the gentle authority of someone who had been raised by a very patient man and absorbed every bit of it. She had her mother's eyes and her father's steadiness. A mother from Vietnam finally helped her daughter with homework in both languages. The daughter went from failing her English class to getting straight A's. A teenager from Brazil felt less alone when he understood what people were saying. He started speaking up in class, started making friends, started believing he belonged at his new school. An elderly couple from Korea could finally talk to their grandchildren. Their daughter cried the first time they had a real conversation, not through a translator, not with her having to repeat everything 3 times, but a real conversation between grandparents and grandchildren. A woman from Mexico got hired for a job because she could now communicate with clients. She got promoted 6 months later. She came back to the Saturday sessions to volunteer and help other people, the way Marcus had helped her. Each story was like a thread, and each thread connected back to the moment Marcus knocked on a boardroom door. Years passed, 2 years, then 3, then 5. Sophie was 12 years old now. She was thinking about applying to advanced programs, the kind that only accepted the most talented students, the kind that led to opportunities that Marcus never had. She'd always been smart. She'd inherited her father's patience and her mother's curiosity. She loved language and learning. She wanted to understand the world, but she was also poor. The kinds of advanced programs she wanted to get into usually weren't available to kids from families like hers. That's when the letter arrived. It was from the International University Preparatory Program, one of the most selective programs in the country, accepting only 50 students nationally, free for qualified low-income students. Sophie opened it at the kitchen table, the same table where her parents had eaten breakfast together before her mother got sick, the same table where her father had sat with her every morning of her life, the same table where that dinosaur magnet, the one her mother had left behind, still held the grocery list to the refrigerator. She read the letter once, then she looked up. "Dad," she said, "I got in." Marcus set down his coffee. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and held his daughter without saying anything. For a very long time, he thought about the moment he decided to knock on a boardroom door. The 4 minutes he spent helping a stranger in a lobby. The Saturday sessions he never missed, even when he was exhausted. The scholarship he turned down. so he could be present for his wife, the choice to keep showing up, even when no one was watching, all of it connected, all of it creating a path for his daughter, toward opportunity he couldn't have created alone. It wasn't just his sacrifice, it was the sacrifice plus the choice to knock on that door. It was being invisible, plus choosing to be visible when it mattered. He thought about his wife, about the recipe card still in the top drawer, about the way she'd slanted her handwriting upward, like she was already moving toward the next good thing. And he thought about how none of this would have happened if he hadn't helped that man in the lobby, if he hadn't knocked on that door, if he hadn't chosen to be brave. Marcus told Victoria first, before anyone else. They were in that same conference room, with the blinds half open. Morning light at that same angle. That makes ordinary rooms feel quietly important. Victoria listened to him talk about Sophie's acceptance, about her academic achievements, about her future unfolding in front of them. And when he finished, Victoria did something that surprised him. She hugged him, not a business hug, a real one. She has your steadiness, Victoria said. I hope she never loses it. Marcus thought about his daughter's steadiness, where it came from. The inheritance of a father who showed up, a father who chose presence over ambition, a father who learned 8 languages, not to impress anyone, but to connect. She won't, he said, I'll make sure of it. The International University Preparatory Program was founded, partly because of the Unseen Foundation. The program specifically recruited talented students from low-income backgrounds. It specifically looked for intelligence that hadn't been credentialed. It specifically trained the next generation to value overlooked talent. And Sophie Reed, walking that path, would probably go on to create opportunities for others who'd been overlooked, who'd been invisible, who'd had their value dismissed. The ripples continued. One choice, one moment, countless lives changed across time. 6 months after Sophie's acceptance, during one of the Saturday sessions, someone took a photograph. It captured Marcus teaching. At what had started as a folding table and had evolved into a full classroom, it captured Sophie helping a student from Somalia with pronunciation. It captured a bulletin board filled with photos of success stories, pictures of people who had started as invisible and had become visible again. In the center, a photograph of Marcus and Victoria standing together, both smiling in a way that suggested they had learned something important about what matters. The caption underneath read, "The day everything changed." But really everything had changed. The moment Marcus decided to knock on a boardroom door, everything had changed when Victoria decided to look. Everything had changed when 2 people, who seemed to live in completely different worlds, chose to see each other as human. The story reminds us that the person no one notices is sometimes the person the whole room needs. Knowledge built through genuine care for others carries more weight than any credential. Grief does not extinguish talent. It only changes its shape. A father getting a braid wrong 10 times and trying an 11th is doing something that matters more than he knows. The child who finally feels understood, in a borrowed room on a Saturday morning, is connected, quietly and deeply, to something far larger than either teacher or student can see. When we dismiss someone, we dismiss not just their present but their future. And we dismiss our own opportunity to be better. It takes courage to admit you were wrong. It takes more courage to change because of it. Small kindnesses do not disappear. They travel. They transform. They return in ways we cannot predict or plan for. All of it turns out to have been exactly enough. If this story moved you, subscribe our channel for more stories like this. Stories about people who matter. Stories about moments that change everything. Because sometimes the person standing right in front of us is exactly the answer we've been looking for. We just have to be willing to see them.